Richardson with Relevate. We're Real Estate Elevated, and we're bringing you another episode of I'm Moving to North Carolina, Now What? Today we're talking about pest inspections. This is a big facet during our inspection period here in North Carolina, which, as y'all know, real estate's a little different here in North Carolina as far as what we do and what we don't do. So I have the pleasure of interviewing Stephen Ross with Rise Pest NC. Stephen, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. So he's going to give us a little bit of backstory and kind of the quick and dirty version of understanding pest inspections. What does that mean? What's the difference between a pest inspection, a termite inspection? What's kind of severe, what's not? And then also how they tend to do things a little bit different and are a little eco-conscious in comparison to maybe some of their competitors. So Stephen, can you dive in a little bit and give us a backstory? How did you even wind up in this industry?
I kind of stumbled into the industry. My brother just called me, and I was working in retail about 11 years ago, and just said there was an opening at the company he was working with, and had to be better than retail, so I jumped into it. And I feel like, as with a lot of technicians who start in pest control, it was just a job, but somewhere in my tenure in pest control, I started to really pay attention to the bugs that I was dealing with and the effect that it had on the rest of our ecology, and kind of grew into my love and respect for both the career and the effect that it has on the world around us.
Yeah. No, I definitely want to come back and talk a little bit about that and the beekeeping aspect that you guys also bring to the table. But if we're talking about real estate, guys, here in North Carolina, we're an as-is purchase state. So we do not do pre-inspections. So once you go under contract and enter that due diligence time frame, you get to your inspection period. So Stephen actually works in partnership with your general inspector who would order the pest inspections. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that entails and what to expect, and also kind of some differentiators, because a lot of people think it's just termites?
Sure. So what I do is a wood destroying insect report. It's a report required by the state to define anything that would destroy wood. So termites, powder post beetles, old house borers, wood decay fungi, carpenter ants, carpenter bees, carpenter wasps. There's a whole host of pests that it's not just termites. It's also not everything outside of that. I'm in an industry filled with pests that go from raccoons to roaches. So your report won't say whether you had a history of mice. But if I have an opportunity to meet my clients, my buyers, then I like to share that information, because we, of course, offer general pest control as well. So we remediate those issues.
Yeah, so if I'm walking around a house, right, and I'm kind of trying to look out for signs of potential pest damage, what are some things that would pop out to you that maybe wouldn't pop out to me as the layman?
Do you mean for...
Like, just if I'm eyeballing something, whether it's in the crawl space or I'm walking the exterior of the home, what would be some indicators that maybe somebody like you would need to step in and kind of evaluate that further?
Sure. So the telltale signs of termites would be mud tunnels coming up from the foundation of the house. And I feel like a lot of people would notice that, but not everyone would. But more than that, a lot of people just don't look up. And a lot of the time there will be exit holes where termites aren't going to stay inside your wall forever. They're going to exit, and a professional will be able to recognize where those exit holes are. Or if it's not termites, powder post beetles are very small exit holes, about the size of if you tapped a pencil against a piece of wood. So that's something that we would look for typically in your crawl space, where the layman's not probably looking around under the house. So.
Yeah. So I know we've talked about this crawl space. So people don't always know what those are. Here in North Carolina, we have a couple different types of foundations, and your crawl space is an area that most people don't want to go in, right? Because it could either be a walk-in crawl space like our house, you can actually stand in them, but many of them, you're actually literally crawling, right? So the name kind of defines itself. So often, do you have people join you in the crawl space, or is this something that's kind of like your realm?
It's predominantly my realm. Yeah, every once in a while I'll get a curious homeowner who wants to come in and see, or especially if it's a younger first-time home buyer who just wants to know how things work, then I never mind the company,
Yeah.
but it's definitely not a place where I usually get somebody tagging along.
Gotcha. So the tag-alongs and the friends are typically things that are down there, not necessarily people.
Yeah.
So we deal with a lot of humidity in North Carolina to an extent that I don't think people realize until they get here and get to experience their first summer with us. So how does moisture play into possible pest issues?
Oh, heavily. A moist environment is a breeding ground for anything. All life needs moisture. So if you have moisture getting into the crawl space in the form of humidity, then you're more likely to have issues with termites, roaches, spiders, mice, everything. And beyond that, microbial growth is a big concern. So we offer some remediation for microbial growth and moisture control. But every house is different, and so the approach to that control is going to be different as well.
Absolutely. So something else that people kind of talk about with crawl spaces, for example, is do I need a dehumidifier? Do I need to encapsulate? Is there anything you can speak to in regards to those recommendations?
Sure. Sometimes an encapsulation is a good call, and sometimes you don't need that much. Like I said, it's case to case. So what I would do is inspect. What I find generally, a crawl space like yours, where it's really tall, you probably get really good cross ventilation just through your foundation vents, and it probably controls your moisture really well.
Yeah.
Whereas a shallow crawl space, if the vents are open, the humid air flows in and it doesn't escape because there's not a cross breeze. It's blocked by air conditioning ducts or just low-hanging joists. And so those are the instances where we see more and more that it's beneficial to cover those foundation vents and use a dehumidifier, put down a good poly vapor barrier to block moisture from coming up from the soil.
So in your experience, what's something that a client has either seen on a report or heard of and they're like, oh my God, that must be terrible, but it's actually not that bad? So is there something like a myth you can debunk?
Well, yeah, the word termites. As soon as somebody sees that there's been any kind of termite history, buyers get really trepidatious and back out of a sale. It's not necessary. Most of the time, termites are, we're able to catch them pretty early, and especially if the previous homeowner has had any kind of inspection done, then we're catching them within 5 years, and it's not a lot of damage. But even if there is damage done, it's typically something that can be fixed. So we can eliminate the termite colony. We can eliminate powder post beetles. I'd say just don't overreact. Don't have a knee-jerk reaction to the presence of any kind of pest. Lean on the opinion of your pest inspector, because I see it every day, and I could tell you whether it's something that is going to warrant a strong reaction or just let's take care of this eventually.
Yeah, well, and speaking of certain pests, so for example, carpenter bees, that tends to be one that I feel like folks coming from elsewhere, they're not really familiar with that. Like immediately when I mention carpenter bees, or like if there's a hole where a carpenter bee has been, and it could just be one, they are like, what is that? And typically it's kind of like a bee on steroids is the way I describe it. I'm not, they tend to be a little bit bulkier, I guess, than maybe the ones most people are familiar with. But how often do you see carpenter bee damage, and is that something that people should worry about?
I wouldn't worry very much about it. Most of the time, when I'll find a carpenter bee hole somewhere on just about any house that has wood. They're everywhere. They're one of North Carolina's native pollinators. They're an important part of our ecosystem. But you don't want them to destroy your home. So when we do a report, we're going to look for, is there an occasional visitor coming to make a home in your fascia board, or are they doing significant damage? And that's just something we take note of. But that's kind of the fortunate part. When they do start doing damage, it's often located in one or two boards of the home that are pretty easily replaced.
Gotcha. So speaking of bees, obviously this is a passion of y'all's. Y'all are very eco-conscious. Can you speak a little bit more about that aspect of your business and how you guys got into that realm as well?
Yeah, of course. So my wife Chrissy and I got into beekeeping about 5 years ago, just as a hobby. We've always loved bees. My wife's nickname as a child was Chrissy Bee, and so it was really important to her. And we got about 2 hives 5 years ago, and it was just that very small hobby, and didn't have anything to do with my profession other than trying not to kill bees. And when we started Rise Pest Management about 2 years ago, we kind of integrated that into the business, and so we offer honeybee relocation services, And just throughout the course of our general pest control, we try to use ecologically responsible methods of pest management so that we're not just spraying heavily and causing runoff. And the Department of Agriculture has pretty strict rules that limit things like that runoff. But it's easy to miss something. I can tell you for sure the exterminator that I was 10 years ago didn't care. I was the kid who got a job, and I'd show up and the customer would say, mix it up extra strong. But like, all right.
Yeah.
And just get it done. And like I said, kind of developed a passion for our ecology and a respect for the world around us. So we just try to be good stewards of the land that we've got. And so, for instance, our mosquito management, most mosquito management would be the use of pyrethrin fogs. We don't do that. So if you were to order a mosquito service from most companies, they'll have a backpack leaf blower. And
Yes.
it's very effective. It's the quickest way to kill mosquitoes and bees and butterflies and lightning bugs.
Interesting that little piece kind of gets left off of the tagline when you're getting signed up for this stuff.
Yeah, well, and most services will tell you that it's pollinator friendly because they're not going to spray flowering plants.
Gotcha.
The problem is it's a fog, and there's always some amount of wind. It's going to blow and it's going to land on flowering plants. So it's inevitably going to cause some amount of damage, and you can try your best to mitigate it, but the best way to mitigate it is to just not do that. So we use a service called Into-Care that attracts a mosquito into a stationary bucket. There's floating water with an attractant in it. They land on a floating barge with a gauze that has a powder. They land on it to lay their eggs. The powder clings to them with static, and in that powder there's a fungus that kills the adult in about 10 days. And in the meantime, she flies around and lays eggs in 15 different spaces, average.
Yeah.
And every time she lands, it deposits a larvicide into that body of water. So it's going to kill the larva without spreading product all over your landscape where it's going to affect honeybees. So it's a much more ecologically responsible method of mosquito control.
Well, and I love that you're bringing up mosquito control, because I do know that a lot of folks when they're moving here, that's actually something I get asked often. If there is any body of water, it could be a kiddie pool, it could be a river, a lake, it doesn't matter. If there's any signs of water in the distance, I immediately get asked, are mosquitoes an issue? And then we have to have this conversation about different types of mosquito control and all that good stuff. So I think this is definitely a good avenue to kind of segue into another facet of y'all's business, and that's the pest control side of things. So how often should a homeowner be doing any type of pest management or inspections after the contract period? So when I actually own the home.
Sure. So that would depend a lot on what type of pests you want to manage. So general household pests, ants, roaches, spiders, we can take care of most of that with residual pesticides around the foundation of the home about once a quarter.
Okay.
Whereas the mosquito service that we offer, we service those at least once a month because we want to make sure that the water levels are maintained and there's a fresh batch of the adulticide and larvicide in the stations. So it varies. We custom tailor our plans to meet whatever pest problems each home is likely to encounter.
Interesting. Well, is there anything else that you feel like is a differentiator for y'all's business, or something that's really important for the audience to kind of know as far as pest management expectations or just the way y'all do things?
Yeah, I think we've kind of highlighted it, but just the fact that we approach things in the most ecologically responsible way that we can. Every exterminator in Raleigh can take care of bugs in some way or another. And many have an ecological bent to them. So we're not the only player in town, but I think it's important to kind of shop your options and don't just pull the trigger on the first exterminator that knocks on your door, because there will be many. But my wife and I are a small family-owned company with a ecologically responsible method of pest control, and we'd appreciate whatever business we get.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been super, just informative. And I also think it's really great for folks who are moving here to kind of understand the process as well as how to maintain their home, because once they buy it, they're probably going to live in it for a hot minute. So I really appreciate your time. And guys, we'll actually drop their information in the description of this video. So if you would like to reach out to this family-owned business, you can contact them either by the information below as well as on Spotify and podcasts everywhere. I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate. All right, y'all, thank you for joining us today. Be sure to like, share, and follow us on Instagram as well as YouTube. We're also on Apple Podcasts. Again, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate.